Scenes are areas, levels, modes, or screens that divide up gameplay. A scene has its own game objects and its own timeline. Different scenes can be made for different purposes and have different objects, lighting, backgrounds, timescales, etc. You can change all of these things programmatically, but it's generally easier to define different scenes and change between them as a player progresses through the game. A scene will generally represent something like a level, or part of a level if it's a particularly big level. Ever seen a Unity-made game where it has to load between segments of a level? It's changing between scenes when that happens, usually. The scene can also be the title screen, or the options menu, or the end credits, etc. A scene can also represent different modes, say for a mobile game with a single player or multiplayer options, or like an arcade mode versus campaign mode, which would probably be many different scenes, etc. Before you can switch between scenes in your game, you need to add them to the build settings. Go to File, and then click on Build Settings, and you should see a list of scenes in the build. Click Add the current scene to add this scene to the build. It's now available for use in the game. To change between scenes, you need to use the Scene Manager to load the scene, either synchronously or asynchronously. I'll talk about this in more detail in another video, but synchronously means that it will load immediately without executing any further code, and the game will freeze until the next scene loads. If load time is expected to be very short, then this is acceptable, but usually you want to load asynchronously. Asynchronous loading means that the next scene is loaded in the background. This means that code in the current scene continues to run and allows you to show a loading screen while the next scene loads, which is generally better UX. Game objects have a built-in method called don't destroy on load, which will keep the object loaded between scenes. You can use this, for instance, to keep the player object loaded between scenes rather than having a separate player object for every scene. You can even load multiple scenes at once, using one as the base scene and then changing out some scenery or props with the second one. Additionally, you can persist data between scenes using tools like player prefs and scriptable objects. I'll talk about these more in the scripting series, but player prefs are like settings or other variables that you can store in a file, like the player's score, health, controller settings, or other small amounts of game data. For bigger, more complex or sensitive data, you can use scriptable objects. This is better for storing inventory, quest dialogue, AI behaviors, saving and loading game states, etc.